So, thank you everybody for being here for the special edition of Faith Cafe tonight. Um, the racial justice team at CPC has been working hard over the last year and a half at a number of racial justice issues. And in the past few months, the focus of attention has come down to an issue of generational wealth. And this has come from our listening to God and listening to people of color in the community and saying that this is an essential issue. And so we've been involved in this in a number of ways. We've been involved with the Mount Zion mortgage payoff and looking at CPC banking and investments, CPC use of vendors. And then as we zeroed in even further on home ownership, we were taking a period of time to look at uh, whom we wanted to partner with on this issue. And we were about to go one direction. And then we found out that our very own Grace Trewartha was on the advisory board for Own It. So we hit the pause button and spent some time interacting with Grace and looking at Own It, and thankfully landing there as a partner. So we've been promoting this homeownership for families of color, developing equity, building wealth, building the possibility of generational wealth for the last few weeks. And we'll give a report in a little bit about how we're doing with our matching program. So Grace has a presentation tonight. She's also joined by a couple advisory board members that will pop in when we get to the Q&A time. So both Sarah and Tiffany are here. Thank you guys very much for being here. And I think with that, I'm just going to pray briefly and then Grace, turn it over to you.
Sounds good.
God, thanks for helping us to hear the call of your people and the voice of your Spirit. Continue to prompt us to listen and to respond. So may we give ourselves to you tonight to lean into and abide with you and see what you would do in us and through us. Thank you for this time together. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rich, for that introduction. And I'd like to thank again Tiffany and Sarah for joining me. And please, as I've told them, please, please feel free to interrupt and add context or other information when the Spirit moves you, and we'll open it up for a Q&A afterwards. Just to let you all know, this is one of my favorite topics. If you don't know, I work in investment management, so I manage money for a variety of people, but I also have a financial coaching business and financial education business of my own. And in that business, we pretty much talk about wealth all the time. And the reason we talk about wealth all the time is because that is the most important number and most important goal in one's financial well-being, which is essentially meaning your well-being, period. And even though a lot of things in the US are based on income, and we talk about income a lot, and we talk about the minimum wage, there's less talk, or there has been less talk about wealth. But wealth is by far the more critical piece. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. So first we're going to define it. And wealth is defined essentially as the difference between one's assets and one's liabilities. And that's a very sort of banky technical term, but it's essentially the difference between what you own and what you owe at any point in time. So I often refer to it as either net worth or equity, or sometimes even as freedom, because that's in many cases what it represents. And what it also is, very importantly, for the purposes of this discussion, is your safety net. And these are the resources that you can tap into in times of need. And I think we've just gone through probably about 18 months where that's all become very real to a lot of us. And again, it's a much better indicator of financial well-being than income. And I will say a safety net in the United States is distinctly not from governing bodies, whether it's federal, state, or local. You know, a lot of my clients are based overseas. So I know that for a fact, this is not the case worldwide, but here in America, we're basically essentially knitting it together on our own. So even though income maybe doesn't look so bad by race, and so we see here the typical median household income by race, you're like, okay, it's not a great picture, but you know, white median income looks to be about 75% more then
Grace,
Hispanic.
Grace, were you going to share your screen?
Oh my gosh.
It's not sharing yet. Sound like you're referring to it. There we go.
I am.
Thanks.
No, thank you, Barry. So you can see here the median household income by race doesn't look that bad. Maybe not terrible. Okay, 75% more income in household incomes that are described as white versus Hispanic and Black. But from a wealth standpoint, the picture is much worse. The typical white family has 8 times the wealth of the typical median Black family and 5 times the wealth of the typical Hispanic family. And it gets even worse as you go deeper into the demographic group. So you get to the point where you're looking at households headed by young, single Black women. Essentially, their median typical wealth is effectively 0. And 0 is frankly not much of a safety net. So why is this important? Why is this so critical? So some of you may recognize this pyramid. You can type into the chat window if you do. But this was an idea presented by American psychologist Abraham Maslow in 1943 in a paper called A Theory of Human Motivation. And this is his hierarchy of needs. And he posited that essentially we all want to be the best that we can be and achieve our potential. But in order to do so, we have to progress through each of these levels and make sure all of our needs are taken care of in the level below before we can ascend. So the idea is starting with your physiological needs, your most basic food, water, shelter, and then moving up into safety. And going through all these before you get to that top, which is where we're flourishing. And frankly, I want to be flourishing. I want everybody in our community and our society to be flourishing. That actually enhances my own flourishing if I know that these gifts are broad-based and accessible to all. But that's unfortunately not the case. Not the case. Instead, I think we have quite a few people who are living on the edge. 70% of people live paycheck to paycheck, including nearly 1 in 10 workers making more than $100,000. Okay, so this is just covering sort of their monthly needs. Measured another way, 37% of households could not cover a $400 emergency expense using cash or cash equivalents. So this is far from flourishing. This is, for many segments, a society in crisis, I think. And what's worse is if there is something that tips you over that edge that you're living on, there's a good chance you stay there, in some respects stuck, and kind of a mockery of this myth of American mobility that this country professes to be the case. If we think about a situation in which you have no safety net, which is the case for a lot of people. You know, I work with a lot of people who are starting at a negative if they have, say, a lot of student debt, if they are early in their careers. If you have no safety net, essentially you don't have a lot of resources to address all of these other pillars of wealth building in the US. Healthcare, housing, education, employment, a solid career to build the next generation's safety net. Okay, so this is a vicious cycle that starts when you don't have that wealth to begin with. On the flip side, right, you have the virtuous cycle. And it all starts with a safety net in the form of generational wealth. But don't think of generational wealth as necessarily just bequests that you pass on to the next generation, but actually investing in these pillars at every stage of your family's, your household's life. Think about the difference. Think about what you can invest in when you have 188,000 versus 24,000 versus 0. So I want to talk about one other thing in regards to wealth. There are tangible forms of wealth that add up to that net worth, equity, generational wealth piece. Okay, this is what most people think of in terms of wealth. Cash accounts, investment accounts, vehicles, real estate, jewelry, personal property, businesses, education, savings, right? These are all tangible items that we can add up, convert to cash, and land on a numerical value, okay?
Grace, I'm sorry to interrupt one more time.
Yeah.
I think you might be advancing slides, but we're still on the pyramid slide. Is that?
No,
Oh my,
I'm not Barry. I'm caught up with her.
oh,
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Uh, We are too.
I'm
how's
sorry.
everyone else?
Something on my
Oh,
end.
that's okay. How's everyone else
Forgive
doing?
me. Sorry about that.
I think you're good for most
Okay.
of it, Grace.
We're good.
Okay, great. So the issue is that, you know, there's tangible forms of wealth, but there's also intangible forms of wealth, and they compound the inequality. Okay, so some of those intangible forms of wealth are, for instance, the environment you live in, your education, skills, right, that you have, your kin network, okay, your family, who would you rely on, you know, in times of need? And I will say for many Black Americans, that kin network can be a double-edged sword, because even if you are a Black American who has managed to build up, and they do, of course, tangible forms of wealth, oftentimes your kin network will be calling on you as a first resource in those times of need. Okay. Professional connections. I went to Harvard Business School. Some of you may not have known that. I don't tend to lead with it. But, you know, if you would ask any of my classmates, colleagues at Harvard Business School why they would take out 2 years, okay, from probably a relatively lucrative career to attend school and take on, in some cases, significant education debt, they would say, oh, you go there for the network. You know, so that is a real asset with a real value. Our religious community, I think that we all know that goes without saying. Potentially a lack of trauma. And as you go through this list, I hope you see how like not having these things or having a can be also a liability, an intangible liability. Personal attributes. If you're someone who walks through the world very much adhering to the norms, I think that is a form of wealth, whether it's documented versus undocumented, white versus Black, male versus female. Those things can also give you, you know what, a certain confidence in how you walk through the world, a certain self-esteem, a certain expectation that things are going to work the way they should and the way that you expect them to. And then lastly, you know, respite, rest. You know, when you have a safety net, you don't have to worry about any kind of high wire balancing act, you know, food versus medicine or rent versus gas. So these are all things that I think are intangible forms of wealth. We don't even really ever, you know, acknowledge them, but also compound the inequality that we see reflected in the financial figures. And if this wasn't enough, let me tell you, the wealth gap is no accident. The government is involved in every piece of this. The laws and policies that we have in place around healthcare, housing, education and how it's funded, professional, retirement savings, these are nothing less than the gears and workings of a well-oiled inequality machine. What we have today is exactly what you would expect to have from an inequality standpoint, given the laws and public policies we have in place. And I'm happy to go into any of them with any of you at any time. We can talk about it. Thank you, Uncle Sam. All right, so this is the state of affairs. We want to work at closing that gap, sharing the prosperity. I think it's for all of our benefit. So here are the pillars again. Why are we working on housing? Why are we looking at this piece? There are a lot of reasons. One is, and nothing's going to come on this slide for a while. So the first is there's already a fair amount of policy infrastructure around home ownership. It's already acknowledged as a worthy public goal. There are already lots of down payment assistance programs, first-time home buyer help. And there's also a lot of research around the importance of zip code, where you grew up, in terms of driving other wealth building factors, whether it's proximity to, you know, quote unquote, good schools, healthy environment, and, you know, access to employment, transportation networks. Another reason is, you know, the real estate and finance industries were very involved in creating the wealth gap. So there's some symmetry in now those same industries working for change. And that is the industry that I think was a lot of the genesis for Own It was Sarah and her work as a real estate broker in Madison, and her work with her clients, and Tiffany's work with a lot of these existing homeownership assistance programs. One other reason, so this graph, you can see on the left-hand side, net worth tiers. So this is total net worth, okay? So the second bar there, $100,000, that's a kind of a median number for Americans. And you can see that in that bar, in that row, the primary residence, which is the dark orange, almost red portion, is by far the largest. And there's a reason that for almost everybody, the home represents the largest portion of wealth of those with 100,000 in assets. Like I said, it's considered to be a worthy goal, a public good almost, that people own where they live. And also it has a mechanism within it that is primed for equity building, because you're in many cases making regular recurring payments like rent, but with a wealth building component if you own your home. Okay, but of course the barrier is saving enough, plugging into that virtuous wealth cycle when you don't have generational wealth, for all the reasons we've discussed previously. Okay, one last thing, and I think this is an important one too. Own It also has ambitions, because Sarah and Tiffany, they're ambitious women, and they have ambitions to start a movement where home sellers and real estate agents can publicly proclaim that they will donate a portion of their sale, like a home sale, right, to this initiative, Own It. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because real estate agents, home sellers often meet at a moment which I call a high wealth realization moment, when values on paper or Zillow, right, becomes actual cash in hand. Many of us probably recently received a postcard in the mail that says, you know, your home is now assessed at this value. And frankly, I don't feel like I worked very much to increase the value of my home. In fact, my home seems to be full of boys who are actively working to destroy the value in my home. So, but yet, you know, on paper, it looks like that's now what it's worth, and my wealth has somehow grown. So now we have this idea that there is this moment where you're actually generating some real wealth, almost kind of magically. You know, maybe that we can start a movement to actually share some of that in the community. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about our partnership with One City Schools. So based on fair housing laws, down payment assistance programs, of which I would put Own It in that group, we are not able to award funds based on race, even though all the policies that were in place were race-based, in the sense that they explicitly excluded African Americans and other ethnicities from purchasing homes and accessing affordable mortgages. Whatever the case may be in the past, we cannot use race now to address those disparities. So we are in partnership with One City Schools, because this is a way for us to target our demographic while staying on the right side of those fair housing laws. The other reason is because One City's mission is very similar to what Own It is. The number one item on their equity agenda, and I encourage all of you to check out their website, is breaking the this is a quote, breaking the cycle of long-standing achievement and opportunity gaps, example, homeownership, that have symbiotically undermined the goals, aspirations, and potential of generation of children of color and under-resourced children in Wisconsin. So that is part and parcel of their agenda. And so the idea of this program building generational wealth to support those children is very much in line with their own goals. So the partnership is a free 2-part program designed to eliminate some of the barriers to wealth. And frankly, a huge barrier is not having that generational wealth to begin with. So part 1 is an education program. That's the part that I'm most involved with, given my professional interests. And we're gonna, anybody can take this class, and I hope there's an opportunity for some of the people on this call to also sit in, because I think there are lessons to be learned both of white households and Black and brown households. So we hope to make some of this open to the public, at least that first part. Part two is access to a $15,000 down payment grant. And $15,000, we chose to try to balance the idea of, helping a lot of families, but it's also sort of a symbolic number in the sense that this is the amount any US citizen can give to anyone else each year without filing a gift tax return or reducing their lifetime estate exemption. You can give $15,000 a year, so a couple can give $30,000 a year to anybody. And this is a lot of the ways of how generational wealth is passed on, just in the form of recurring cash gifts that are not reported either as income to the recipient or penalizing the giver in any way, except for the fact that they now have $15,000 less than they did. So that's the second part, and taking the first part will qualify you for the second part, and which there's an application process. So why one city? I think we've talked about that a little bit. Who is eligible? Essentially all families, faculty, and staff. We haven't 100% set on the criteria. Obviously we cannot, and we will not, and we don't want to discriminate on the basis of race. So we're probably gonna look at things like whether somebody in their family before them has owned a house, or whether they would indeed be the first in their home, in their family to own a home, things like their overall level of assets, things like that. So, those are still being worked out, but they will be, when we open it up to applying for the grant, will be a very transparent and thoughtful process, and we will have a committee to choose the recipients. And we hope, frankly, to raise enough money that there won't be any, that we'll be able to serve everybody who is interested. Okay, are there any restrictions for using the money? So, and not to poo-poo the real estate folks, but sometimes, the real estate is not the necessarily the best form of wealth for a particular situation. Right? There are lots of reasons why that might not be the case. So my personal belief is that we should have as few strings as possible attached to these funds, so that they have to use it for down payment due to the way the fund is administered. But if they turn around and sell that home, access that money, my idea is like, let them decide how best to use their wealth, and yes, maybe a home is a great place to do it, but if there's a need and the home doesn't address it, then I want the need to be addressed.
And just for clarity, the purchase of a home or an investment property has to be owner occupied. So they can like purchase a duplex and rent out the other side.
So our vision broadly is to essentially think about our community as the source of that generational wealth. So all of us, the village, it truly takes a village to raise a child. And one city, that's why their school is called what it is. All right, so practically what all of us can do. The first one is to pray for change. And I come back to this one a lot, because even if you learn and then take steps, the size of the problem seems very large. It seems very intractable. And I come back to this a lot, because I think something this big can't be done by just us. Secondly, I think we need to talk about money more, and this is something I really advocate. It's why I teach classes about wealth, about women and wealth, is that we don't talk about money. And so not talking about money, I think, hurts us, because we don't see the advantages that people have. We don't see, the inequities. And so I very much hope that we talk about the ways that which we've benefited from this, perhaps talk to some of our classes and acknowledge that many of us have been given a lot of advantages, and that we're not all on the same playing field, and you can't compare. One of my big maxims is comparison is the thief of joy. And especially comparison without information. you know, comparison without information about, are you actually comparing apples to apples? Okay, third, donate to Own It's down payment fund. You guys have already done, like, I feel like this one I can just check it off. You know, Rich was telling me like where we're at already. I feel like we've almost exhausted all of our matching funds. Champion the wealth building of families after their home purchase. So we don't know exactly what this is going to look like yet, but there's a lot to be done even after a home is purchased from a wealth building perspective. Maintaining the home, refinancing the home, helping with the other pillars of wealth, you know, using maybe the equity in that home to start a business. You know, there's a lot that this can be multiplied forward into. Advocate, and this is in addition, right? This is not like you pick one. Advocate for public policy after you pray. Okay? Because at the end of the day, you're going to make big change. We got to change the rules. We got to change the laws. Totally. And I'm glad. I think we're talking about this more. There's even right in my drive commute to school, they talked about in reference to Biden's speech in Tulsa about the racial wealth gap. I think we're in the midst of perhaps a moment where we can advocate for some big changes here. Promote and support other avenues to Black and brown wealth. You know, Rich talked about these, how the vendors that we choose to use. Maybe if you are selling a home, maybe you go through an agency that has publicly avowed to support this initiative or these efforts. Maybe if you have any hiring responsibility, that you widen the net and you think about, you know, the kinds of job descriptions that we're putting out there and checking them for ways in which they might discourage people from applying. You know, use the avenues that you have to do this. And then lastly, learn more and share with your network. And the website, I'm sure Sarah is gonna pop into the chat, or Tiffany.
It's in there.
Thank you. All right. Don't forget to pray and learn. So recommended reading. So these are some of the books that I've been delving into to inform a lot of what I'm putting together, both for the education course and just in myself, you know, learning about some of the things that we have not been taught necessarily as part of history. I just encourage you to read any book that, you know, walks in someone else's experience. I'll give you an example. I read Sonia Sotomayor's biography called My Beloved World. And in it, she talks about how she didn't really have any money until she was like well into her 40s, because she was supporting her parents. That is a model that is not shared across racial groups. You know, the idea that you are supporting the generation before you. I mean, this is a woman who graduated first in her class in Princeton University. So, you know, that was pretty eye-opening. You know, she was like, yeah, you know, when she got a nomination to the federal court, it didn't take her that long to, you know, do the financial disclosures because there wasn't that much to disclose. And I really recommend Jennifer Eberhardt's book, Biased. I think it's an excellent take on kind of some deeper problems that underpin some of the issues we're talking about. And if it helps, Trevor Noah has said that Jennifer Eberhardt is a genius. So if that helps you. And I think the learning is important too. The praying is important. The learning is important. Heather McGhee, who wrote the Sum of Us, she wrote a line that I think about a lot. And that is, you can't solve a problem with the consciousness that created it. It's actually not going to be enough, I think, that we change public policies. I think we almost have to go to the hearts and minds level, that this is actually something that we do not want for the place that we live. So I think that's as important a piece as legislation, because we've had legislation to try and do away with these. And I feel like it just, you know, racism just comes back in other forms, like a hydra, and it doesn't go away. We're happy to take questions. We have Tiffany here. We have myself. Thank you. Sarah, happy to take any questions.
Grace, if you could take off your screen share so we could see each other for the QA time.
Sure.
So I'll just start off by saying that when we started thinking about this program, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for Black people to be able to attain home ownership. I work with a lot of families that do have down payment assistance from like the city of Madison, the county of Madison, and moving out, which is basically if you have a disability and you're within a certain income bracket, you could qualify for down payment assistance. But there are so many rules and regulations in regards to getting that down payment assistance, and it kind of steers sellers away from that. So basically, what's attached with the down payment assistance is a stigma. Like it's going to be problematic if we accept this buyer who has $30,000 in down payment assistance because we have to get an inspection. And what if something goes wrong and they don't have any extra money to go on top of this $30,000? Because as you know, most people have at least 20% down and something extra. And if they don't, they have a parent or an uncle or a brother or sister to give them that money. And most Black people don't have that. So that in itself is a frustration. And with this program, none of those obstacles are attached to this. And we also have an education component because I have to walk through the whole home buying process with each person that I help with this down payment assistance, because yes, they're granted this money, but nobody educates them on earnest money. You have to have 1% down, 1% of the purchase price at least. And right now in these days, if you're serious about the home, you have a lot more than that. You have 10,000 down, or you have $20,000 earnest money. So you have to like educate these clients, and then you have to say, okay, so we would like most homeowners to have, or potential buyers to have, a conventional loan instead of an FHA because of PMI, right? We want to put them in a good position. We don't want them to have to pay private mortgage insurance. So we have to educate them on credit, or we have to tell them what it is. Like a lot of clients that I have that has down payment assistance, they don't even know like the terminology. Like after closing, I still have clients that call me and say, hey, I know I bought this home, but can I paint the walls? And I literally have to say, yeah, it's your house. Like you can do whatever you want. You can knock a whole wall down if you want, because nobody's ever educated them. So we're going to basically walk them through this process in regards to, this is what you need to do. If you can purchase a home warranty before you close or after you close, it's $525. It'll cover this, this, and this. You pay a $75 deductible if something breaks. That's good. This is how you maintain your home. If you
that's all that intangible knowledge, you know, that gets passed down just as much as any other kind of wealth.
Right. And if you aren't ready to buy a home, or if you don't want to buy a home right now, if you want to know the history of where we got to this point, or if you're not Black and you just want to educate yourself so you can educate the next person or your children, like those are our goals. That's what we want to do. That's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, maybe at this point, it's just living very inexpensively, saving your money, maybe even putting it in an investment account in stocks, bonds, fixed income, so that in 10 years, maybe you'll be, you know, better equipped and ready. So it's the education piece, of course, I feel very strongly about is critical, but I really think it is.
And right now, this program is just a pilot for one city. Our hopes and aspirations are to basically expand this program to different schools and other organizations as well. We strongly believe in the goals and the mission over at one city, and that's why we chose them. Like we are aligned with what they're doing and how they're expanding, and like they're great over there. And that's why we expanded it to the staff as well. So it's not only just for the families, but it's the staff as well. If you don't have a home and you want to buy a home.
We have a question in the chat. Does this program work with opportunity zones?
Meaning,
I don't think so directly, only because I believe opportunity zones are for investors to invest in those markets and not necessarily those in the market for a single family home.
Can you speak to the relationships that you're trying to develop for the families that are taking on the grant that help them to be able to navigate through the types of systemic racism that make it hard to be a homeowner?
well, there will be an education component in regards to the history of how we got here, why it's so hard for Black and brown people to be able to get approved for homes, to be able to buy homes. How basically there was, I don't know, stolen land and stolen wealth for generations to come, redlining. Like, we will cover all that in the education series. And moving forward, we'll have a lender on hand as well as Grace too, in regards to financing.
Yeah,
and
so
money.
the idea is that there's a general class that everyone will take, and then depending on their readiness, they will be broken off into different tracks for whether it's almost ready for home ownership, repairing credit, or just basic budgeting, or maybe how to earn more money, right? Because that it's not like income isn't completely unimportant in this. And the idea is that if they are tracked with a group that is at a similar space, that's the beginning of their own support network. And potentially that's what my point was about, helping them after a home ownership purchase. There's no reason why we couldn't all stay involved with these families and make these, relationships part of the fabric of, our lives. I mean, part of the issue is that, we just don't live near each other. Madison is such a racially segregated town that you just don't have a lot of opportunity to have, groups that are very different from this perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I asked is I had experience moving from a very ethnic neighborhood into a more homogeneously mainstream culture neighborhood. And if people don't want you in that community, it can be quite painful.
Yeah, so that is something that Dorothy Brown actually talks about in her book, The Whiteness of Wealth, is that you're making a trade-off, right? So we have to acknowledge that there may be very good non-financial reasons that a family may want to stay in a neighborhood. Nobody wants your neighbors to call the cops on your kid every time the kid rides a bicycle in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
But that's not on them. Let's take it on us to stop doing that and telling our neighbors and friends to stop doing that. But yes, we have to tell them that, you know what, there's going to be a financial cost to living there because of how things are appraised, how taxes are assessed. There's, they need to know the barriers. And I find that it's going to be, I think, a little bit of a tough balance to acknowledge the barriers while at the same time showing them that they can do it, because they can do it. We just want to show you, we just want to give you a full picture.
And realistically, some people think that they can't. I'm on an affordable housing committee, and there are literally families, they literally have $100 left over at the end of the month, because right now they're paying $1,600 a month for rent, and they have 4 children, and they work and they make $12 an hour. How?
Yeah. How do they save that 20%? 20%. Madison's the most expensive Midwest market right now. Housing market. The median house is over $375,000. That blows my mind. I was a big proponent of the 15,000 grant being bigger.
Hey Grace, I have a quick question.
Yes, John Renee.
Tiffany, thank you so much for the presentation.
Thank you for being here.
You touched on something that struck me when you mentioned Justice Sotomayor, statement that she has to support her parents
Mm-hmm.
up to her 40s.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the reality that a lot of migrant families in our community
Yeah.
face, because they they become the main supporter of the families that are left back home. So I was wondering if, I wish this partnership with One City School works well, but I'm also thinking that if it works well, these are communities that this project like this should reach out to, the migrant population, because they don't have, that generational wealth. And on top of that, they have to support many of their family members that are left, that's still living abroad or sometimes even here.
Yeah.
So it's, I really hope that this works well to the point where those foreign born have that opportunity to afford home ownership too.
Yeah, this is pretty much our proof of concept right now. So the education piece, we hope to get started sometime in the fall. We have a presentation to One City families in 2 weeks where we're going to give them basically maybe half the first class of the financial education piece. And then hopefully we'll get schedules aligned so that we can start relatively soon after that. But
And we're having
I hope so too, Jean Rene. That's all I can say to that.
and we're having constant conversations with other realtors, title companies, other brokerages in regards to donating, pledging, anything of that nature as well. Us at the Alvarado Group, we are committed to donating money as well. We're passionate about this. We want to succeed. So we're putting our money where our mouths are as well.
I will
Thank you.
teach. I will teach anybody.
Thank you.
We'll teach for food. So I'm actually teaching a class right now where the price of admission is a donation to own it. So
Nice.
yeah. Any other questions?
Do you have any thoughts about like if this program can run for 10 or 15 years, or for like a current generation, however you measure that, about sort of the second generation and third generation, once there's some family wealth and equity and it can be passed along to another generation? Have you guys discussed that some? I know there's like a lot to just deal with starting a program like this right now, but
So, right, this is our pilot right now, and we do have hopes to expand this program. And our ultimate goal is to basically that one day we will not need this program anymore, right? Like, we shouldn't need this program.
Grace, maybe at this point I could give a bit of an update and a invitation here. I don't want to cut off questions, so we can circle back around to those. But
That'd be great.
So CPC is taking $25,000 out of our generational wealth and putting that forward as matching funds for the first $25,000 that would come from congregation members. So the hope would be at no later than the middle of August that we would have $25,000 in donations matched by the $25,000, and that would be our first $50,000 involvement and investment in this, but certainly not our ending or last involvement with this. That opens the door for us. So at this point, approximately 12 individuals or families have given. We've been letting the church know about this the last couple of weeks. And so far our total is $15,300. So we are over half the way. And so far our net effect is $30,000 into this program, but we would really like to get the rest of the way there as a starting place. So my personal comment on this is, you've mentioned praying and learning and acting. And I would like to invite everybody in this meeting to join Martha and me in being contributors to this program, if you haven't yet. And then the second part of this invitation would be for you to think about who else in your networks, church or otherwise, might be people that have somewhat of a heart or passion or interest in stepping into this issue of generational wealth, and invite them to join you in giving. And so I would love us to leverage this and multiply this over the next couple months and just see what God might do. Now, I don't want to presume about what God is doing with you or your finances. So there's no expectation or judgment that comes with this, but it's a strong invitation. So I'm very thankful for where we are, grateful that a couple weeks in we're at 15,000, and I'm hopeful about where we will be.
Oh, that reminds me. Thank you, Rich. The Own It name has a double meaning, which I forgot to mention, which is that we need to own our responsibility to change the state of affairs, to acknowledge the generational wealth that we've benefited from. And so Own It has, I think, very explicitly laid that out too. I forgot to do so. But we need to own it too, our role.
Change the narrative.
I see another question here.
What advice That's a tough one, Clinton.
So right now, currently, what I'm seeing in regards to the Madison area, there's a lot of mixed use projects going on, meaning that so many of the units would be up under like Section 42 housing, which means that there's an income gap so that the apartment or the townhouse can be affordable, and then the rest of the building or unit is at market rent. So there's a lot of that going on right now. I know that there is some transitional housing going on right now for like rapid rehousing for like homeless people or anybody that's like put in a hotel right now. So up under the CARES Act, there's so many hundreds of thousands of dollars that has been donated to paying like 6 months of rent or a year of rent for people who are having problems paying their rent due to COVID, like right now. But in regards to working with developers, I think it's all business in a tax credit world. So that's a constant battle right there.
If you guys came across any particular housing laws or bills before Madison, Dane County, the state, that you felt like needed some extra support or voice for, we'd love to hear, particulars that we could join in advocating for along the way.
Sure, we would, our goals are to change some of the federal rules and regulations in regards to some of the DPA programs, in regards to the income gaps, in regards to the income caps. I mean, there's so many rules and regulations that are dated and make no sense, but it will take years to see any type of change. But yes, we do need constant advocacy.
Yeah, we're hoping to reach out first to the Wisconsin state legislature. And, the issue with this is that, we're a volunteer organization and board and committee, and we have sort of buckets that we're working on, but one of them is a public policy group in the group that is as of yet unchaired. So, there's sort of fundraising, there's education, and that's a big one. But like I said, that's one of those intractable things that we can't even seem to agree on the most basic things in this country. I mean, any of you who have known me, I've probably talked your ear off about healthcare. That's just a travesty. So, it's like, where do you got to pick and choose. None of us have like unlimited energy. I mean, maybe Norma, but the rest of us are here like, what do I do? Like, where do I put my efforts?
I think the city council is, actually the Madison City Council is addressing the issue of zoning. which
Yeah.
we should be keeping track of, because
Yes.
there are cities that are addressing R1 zoning and changing it so that there's more flexibility in how housing can occur. And that, I think that's a very current issue and something we could probably address with our city council.
I know Minneapolis, for instance, is a municipality that significantly changed their zoning rules to allow for more higher density housing. But even things like tax policy, how earnings are taxed, plays this sort of invisible role in wealth generation, like how much money you keep, like the mortgage interest deduction for homeowners, yet there's no comparable deduction for renters or benefit for renters. So this
Also-
whole yeah,
Also,
Tiffany.
if you're on Social Security disability, there's you can only have so much money in your bank account, or else you'll literally get in trouble and they will cut you off. So how can somebody that is disabled purchase, like, have $20,000 in their account to purchase a house? So yeah, that should be.
Yeah,
done.
it's that sort of virtuous versus vicious cycle. There's so many things that make that stickier than it really should be.
Seems like we're coming up on 8 o'clock. So Grace, you had said you will continue this conversation with anybody at any time.
Absolutely, totally.
So I want to say a big thanks to you, Grace, and Tiffany and Sarah and the rest of your team for your effort. I am just stunned by what you're doing and very, very deeply appreciative for it. Thanks for everybody who has already invested in this program. And I'm grateful for that. And thanks for everybody for just being here tonight to listen and to learn. And I am glad that we're trekking in this path together as CPC. So very appreciative.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Hey, Grace, since you thought we should,
Yeah.
make prayer a big part of this thing, would you pray?
Yes, absolutely. I will. Thank you. Dear Lord, I just, I'm so grateful for this group of people that have come together in a common cause. I just look to you, Lord, as our ultimate safety net, and ask that you help us to see and open our eyes to the ways in which inequities are spread throughout our society, and to be a force for change. And I just hope that you are taking what we start here and multiplying it in only the way that you can direct, Lord. And and thank you so much for those who have already given, and for where this will take us. I pray all these things in your Son's name. Amen.